What's up, everyone? It's Adar coming at you with another episode of Startup Engineering Daily. Let's hop right into it. So our first story is from this project called Just.js that I don't know exactly what they do, but they're kind of like a JavaScript runtime, it seems, and they have some projects on GitHub, but obviously there's someone running it behind the scenes. And they're replying to this tweet from Jared Sumner, who is the founder of Bun, which was acquired by Anthropic. And basically, they've been doing some performance improvements on Bun, obviously. And he's saying in the next version, their event loop gets 2 times faster on Mac OS, which is super interesting. Obviously, not that important for production deployments, which are going to be on Linux, obviously. But for like local development, I guess it'll become faster, which is always good. And running tests and all that stuff, probably as well. But basically, this person came in. They said they were very intrigued by the poor throughput of Node.js on Mac OS. So they did a bit of digging. And they have this really big write-up on Gist here, and they say with changes to libuv, I guess is how you pronounce it, Node.js gets 25 times faster on macOS. Next version of Bun will be 1.5 times faster than this, so still room for removing some overhead in Node.js. And basically they say they're going to try to compile it into a PR, and there's some things too, like set immediate, I guess, causes problems, and the amount of ticks that you get, like you can see here in the screenshot on Node.js, are 80,000 compared to millions for Dino and Bun. And I guess low is the fastest, which is interesting. Never heard of that. But yeah, kind of interesting. So check it out if you're interested in this performance type stuff. Next, we just have a quick one from this guy, Tino Bruss. I don't know who he is really, but I know he's like a tweeter and kind of in that space. But he has this screenshot side by side, which I saw a YouTube short for this, which is why I was very intrigued by it because it's kind of going viral, which is this question that they're asking ChatGPT free versus premium. And the question is, I was given a cup by a friend that's open on the bottom and totally closed on the top. Is there any way I can drink this? Obviously, it's like an upside down cup. On the left, it's saying, yes, you can drink it, but only if you change the pressure conditions, and it's just some slop, you know? And then the ChatGPT Plus says, yes, turn it upside down. So it's just kind of interesting as well, because I was talking to my colleague, and he was explaining to me, like, about people that use the free version of ChatGPT, like how it's kind of a different level and how you're really missing out and getting some trash. So I guess it's kind of an instant mode versus like thinking, as you can see here in the screenshot, but I don't know, something interesting. And someone in the replies was like, they should make it so you get 3 thinking for free and then just really try to upsell them on the instant. So I think that could be a better experience, but very funny. And like it gets memed a lot about how bad AI is, like on YouTube shorts and stuff. Okay, so next we have this tweet from this guy, Joseph Jacks. I don't know how he's affiliated, but he works for OSS Capital, which I guess invests in open source companies. I think I've heard of them before. I don't know what their portfolio really looks like, but essentially he's saying all business models will be replaced by outcome models. And in the replies here as well, you can see this guy Vamsi saying every single thing, seat-based pricing is dead. I find this really interesting. Seat-based pricing is obviously still the meta right now and what everyone's paying for, and kind of how you're able to scale these SaaS, right? Because if you're only charging for like usage across one team, then, you know, you have a limit. Like you need to be able to charge like these 7-8 figure deals like we looked at with Anthropic and Datadog as well. And obviously that'll be like data as well. That's not just like SaaS services, but in terms of like Slack and all these companies, as well as like Atlassian, I believe I heard that they're making it so that Loom is like charged to every single person on the team, even if they don't use it. So they're actually going in an opposite direction. But it is very interesting because when you look at the companies that are also charging per token or essentially need to build token into their business model, they are experimenting a lot with the outcome-based pricing, and nobody's really figured it out. There's usage and all these pieces, but it's very interesting and something to keep an eye on moving forward. Next, we have a tweet from David Kramer, who's replying to Dax. David Kramer is the CTO, I believe, of Sentry, and Dax obviously working on OpenCode. And he's saying, like, what if in OpenCode you could specify project references? So you would essentially have, like, the packages you're using installed locally, and you would be able to use that to have context for your agents to research. And David Kramer is basically telling GitHub that they should add it, auto cache every repo and update it on demand, which I think is super interesting as well, because with skills, I also noticed that as a problem where it's like you have it on GitHub, but you need to pull the new skills or make sure it's updated. And obviously people have tried to solve that, but it's very interesting here as well, the idea of like locally cloning all of your dependencies. And I guess you have it in node modules as well, but it might be bundled or compiled. But with this, it would just be having like a reference, kind of like PNPM, I guess, in a way, where it's like one reference that you can share across all your global cache, as you can see here. So pretty interesting. And then as you can see here as well, he's like, the agent hitting APIs is slow AF. So everything needs to be local, which is very fascinating. And as much context as you can have is really important. Next, we have a tweet from this guy, Addy, who is a director at Google Cloud AI, I guess, is what it says from his bio. But he's responding to a tweet from Boris, who's the creator of Claude Code at Anthropic. And Boris is basically defending engineers, the idea that like we still need software engineers. Someone has to prompt the Claudes, talk to customers, coordinate with other teams, decide what to build next. Engineering is changing and great engineers are more important than ever. And that's in reply to someone asking why Anthropic is still hiring engineers if they think that software engineering is solved. There's definitely multiple levels to it. I think everyone that actually does software engineering professionally understands that software engineering has not been solved. And I believe for sure that like a lot of the foundational ideas that, were kind of figured out in like the 90s and the 2000s are more applicable than ever to building software correctly. Like it actually hasn't really changed how we build software because we still use the same languages and systems. We're just much more efficient with it now and have the ability and the time now to build with best practices with small teams. And that's kind of what Addy's speaking to as well. He says his point is important here. When AI handles the code generation, the engineer's value shifts to decisions above the code. What do we build, why, for whom, and how it all fits together. The bottleneck was always judgment, taste, and systems thinking. AI just made that more obvious. This is interesting because I think 1 and 2 are product, right? I actually don't think that's engineering work necessarily, which coming from small startups is interesting because, engineers I feel like do a lot of the product lifting as well. When stakeholders don't necessarily have the ability or the foresight to think through all the different edge cases. But it is interesting that he's saying here as a director that this is an important piece for engineers to do. And also what Boris is saying is like deciding what to build next. Maybe working in developer tools is a bit different because it kind of has to be engineer led versus like enterprise or consumer products, but definitely interesting ideas here. And I think engineering and like foundational skills are more important than ever. Okay, and next kind of on a similar idea is this tweet from this guy, Stuart Cheney. I haven't heard of him, but he's founder and CEO of, I guess, like a DTC retention program company that he's bootstrapped to 25 million ARR, I guess. So that's pretty cool. And he's saying the 90-90 rule in engineering, the first 90% of the code accounts for the first 90% of development time, then the remaining 10%. People say all these different things, like the last 5% takes 50%, all these different things about how long it takes to consider something complete in software engineering, which is really looking at like demos and edge cases and QA and bug testing and all these different things. You have to think about every single case and make sure every branch is tested theoretically in an ideal world. But it is very fascinating where he's saying like a lot of sub $50 software will be rightly replaced by vibe coders. I wonder what software he's thinking about. Maybe like Magnet. I don't know if people used to use that, or like Flycut, where you can like just do different things on your computer easily and it's like $15 on the Mac App Store. That's kind of what I wanted to do with one of my projects, but I ended up just open sourcing it because of the way the sandbox worked, and I just didn't want to manage any of it right now. But it is very interesting that you can like vibe code these small software. But he says that nobody's replacing like these bigger mid-market companies. I don't know what mid-market means exactly. There's also a bunch of debate about that because like OpenAI and Anthropic don't even have that many employees, but they're like top of the market and all this stuff. But what I thought was very interesting was this reply from Devin as well, which says if you're paying someone, Klaviyo or whoever, you're paying them to focus on their domain and keep innovating. So that's where it's like you always want to pay these SaaS companies. You're getting lower cost because they have economies of scale and they're just utilizing their product to sell it to millions of people ideally. And they're also like the best in class because they are just entirely focused on this problem and always staying up to date on the specifics of this problem and how new technology affects this problem. So that's where I think like SaaS and like sign in with Google is kind of the meme, is the way I think about it, where it's like that's the convenience people want, and people joke about like hating the sign in with Google flow, but it's like really the fastest way to like get people authenticated into a product and verified with their identity. So that's what people want, is convenience at all costs, not security, not privacy, etc. Okay, and next we have a tweet from Rox Codes, kind of another tweet related to this idea that we've been talking about, but I just find it so fascinating, and I'm still trying to formulate my thoughts as well on stuff like this. But what he's saying is like he thinks the big difference in coding with AI versus by hand is decision making. When coding with AI, you usually make decisions to make it work. When coding by hand, you make decisions to make it work well, which is very fascinating. People talk about it in their replies. I don't want to go too deep because like this is such a big topic, so I don't want to get too crazy with it, but what he's saying, essentially, how I read it, is like when coding with AI, you usually make decisions to make it work in italics, right? And when coding by hand, you make decisions to make it work well. And what is really the difference between those two? And I think someone mentions this in the replies, which is like what really makes the difference between working and working well is handling edge cases and bugs, and handling like low performance machines and things like that, or like mobile with very bad network. All of those pieces are what makes something work well, and kind of have to be utilized by doing like QA, doing demos, making sure your branches are tested like we talked about previously. So kind of just these foundational pieces. And like what he says here in quotes, like designing the best solution. He says that AI has discouraged it, but it's actually the time that we're getting back and making sure that you're focused on one project and not going like too wide on your breath and really focusing on like taking advantage of the leverage that AI is giving on one project, where it's like not only should the solution be well designed, it's like the code can be well designed as well, you know? You can have very small functions, you can experiment with abstractions because it's easy to move around, and if you have a test harness, you can make sure that you're not breaking behaviors, and you can update behaviors and make sure that everything's tested. So obviously you don't want to do that with like super legacy code that's running for a ton of people, but as you're building new things, you can really take the time to be like, okay, what is the best way to do this? How can I have the least trade-offs? How can I do the least data migrations? How can I plan this to be extensible for the future? Whereas pre-AI, it was kind of like you had to just take all the time to write it, that you didn't have that much time to refine it, which is like something Prime would talk about, how he really liked refining code and writing it twice, but people were like, this is a waste of time, you know? But now in the world of AI, it's really like, are you really going to make the decision to go above and beyond for this specific feature that you're implementing, or are you just going to try to get it to done so that you can move on to the next thing and feel productive? Next, we have a tweet from this guy, MG. I don't know who he is, but he's replying to this article that's been going pretty viral, talking about token anxiety and saying like there's no parties in San Francisco, or the ones that people are going to, they're just like checking on their agents or wanting to get home and mess around with it. So this guy MG is kind of tying it to senior leadership at large tech companies. I can't really speak to that, but it is very interesting, like what the idea from the original article, where they're like, you used to ask someone what they're working on, but now you just ask them how many agents do they have running, you know? It's kind of like a dopamine hit to be like, oh, I have this many agents running, whereas they kind of tied it to previously, which I think this was a little bit before my generation, but they talked about like, you know, how many followers you have, where it's like such a vanity metric per se. I know followers now make you a ton of money, theoretically, like with brand deals and all that stuff. So it may be a different game as it used to be, but definitely the idea of like how many agents do you have running is a very interesting idea, and it may be a vanity metric, but it's also like if you're doing these things that don't have maintenance costs on the back end, right? Which is like where I feel like live services and building like SaaS products has a lot of high maintenance on the back end that you really need to take care of. You need to think about a lot of things like when building a business of that sort. But for example, projects like doing data or like stock trading or modeling or all these different things that I don't really partake in, but I do have friends that are investigating these things with agents. And that's where it's like, if you do have a lot running at once, you can make things happen, you know? And I do try to look to the future and be like, as it gets better, what is actually necessitated by a human to operate this specific function, you know? And I think that's what a lot of the big companies are looking at as well, is like, where can we exactly replace humans here and what does the future look like? But that is like quite hard to break down, you know? And there's a lot of like gray area and like nuance to working with people as well. And like you have the pros and cons of humans versus like AI is just kind of clueless sometimes, and also people talking about like how they make the models worse, which is a huge conspiracy and debate that we don't have to get into, but definitely something interesting. And I do like the agents, you know, and like we'll talk about OpenClaw being acquired, but I'm definitely like a super big fan of OpenClaw, and I feel like it replaces a lot of apps, but it doesn't help me build new things that require maintenance on the back end. It helps me leverage my time to focus on the things that I actually can scale up, you know? Okay, next we have this tweet from Martin Casado. We just cover him from time to time, so I liked what he was building here, and I learned about this new package, and I thought it would be interesting, you know, for anyone who's into like game development and all that. So he has this game that he's working on, you know, it looks like Stardew Valley or one of these like 2D games, obviously, but he's saying all the engine elements are done, and he built it with Convex, which is super sick. I love Convex, which is a real-time database and serverless platform essentially. And he has this game, I don't know if it's multiplayer, but that would be like the main piece that Convex would provide. And he also talks about using this package called Pixie. I feel like maybe I've heard of this, but I don't remember it, but it does seem like really sick, you know, to be able to do this in web. And that's where I'm still like very fascinated why so many games are desktop based. And I understand like for performance reasons and like gamers, I guess, just really like to push the hardware as much as possible. But I'm really surprised that there hasn't been like a renaissance of web games, you know? And maybe that's just because like people feel like gaming's a waste of time nowadays, versus like back in the day, it was kind of like unique media, whereas now games are just like built to take advantage of us and steal your money essentially. So that could be a reason why, but it is like such a good opportunity for like a new web game or like a new social based game to come out. And maybe it's like a privacy thing as well, where people don't really want to be online as much, but very fascinating and just crazy what you can do with AI these days in terms of like building these services. But obviously, like I always say, like if you're going to launch a live service like this, like there's definitely maintenance, and like you don't want to make sure people are duping, and you want to make sure you ban the bots if it gets popular, and all this stuff that comes with operating a live service in 2026, you know? Okay, so the last story is from Sam Altman and OpenAI announcing that Peter Steinberger, who is the creator of OpenClaw, has joined OpenAI. So there's been a lot on this where it was first launched as Clawdbot, and that's what everyone came to know it as. It went super viral overnight, and it's essentially like an AI assistant that you can launch quite quickly. It's not the easiest thing to set up. There's actually been companies set up that help people set it up, but it's essentially an AI assistant that you can run, and it kind of trains itself and has a nice harness for operating in the world and being able to communicate through Telegram and Discord and all these things. But I think now they're up to like 200,000 stars. They got a cease and desist from Anthropic, who told them to change the name, so they ended up as OpenClaw. And now, after some debates and people rumoring that like he wanted like a $10 million salary, and also that he wanted to make sure it was still open source. I don't know exactly what OpenAI has been able to close here, obviously, but it has been acquired and it's now going to OpenAI. Obviously, people are scared now that maybe that they're going to limit it to OpenAI models only. I think it seems like what they're going to do from seeing other tweets is that they're going to build it into Codex as well, but they're going to keep OpenClaw open source, which was kind of like a requirement for the quote unquote acquihire. But definitely interesting news, and we'll see what comes of this. But the AI assistant wave is here. I'm definitely very happy with my agent that I have that I just talked to through Discord. Obviously, that's kind of like an attack vector, so you have to be careful there with how you communicate with it and what it has access to. But it has replaced like a lot of different apps for me, you know, where it's like instead of having to use like the Claude app, you know, to chat with Claude, which is like so trash and like you can't even stop when it's generating and just so many different things. Obviously, I don't have voice with it, but just being able to chat with it through Discord and just being able to use my Claude Code usage as well to have advantage and take advantage of Opus 4.6, have it check out my projects or do research for me or Google things for me. It's not the best at those things, but it's definitely like a very interesting toy. And it's so cool how you can like really expand on it and evolve it as well to like utilize as an AI assistant. And like we talked previously, like what does it actually look like to create like an AI replacement for a human employee? And we're still figuring those things out, but it will be tools like this where you just talk through chat, maybe integrated in Slack or whatever program people are using at the time, and essentially be like a remote worker, you know? This kind of stuff interests you and you want to talk with some like-minded people, join the Audinato Discord in the description. Thanks.